just reminded of a statement by Professor Hans Bethe. He was a Nobel laureate in physics who discovered the source of solar and stellar energy as being nuclear fusion. When hydrogen nuclei fuse together to form helium, energy is released, and this enormous energy is responsible for the solar energy. This was Bethe's outstanding discovery, for which he got the Nobel Prize. He had a student, a research scholar by name Schweber. He and Schweber jointly wrote a book called Mesons and Fields, which we studied as students in the postgraduate course in physics. Things moved fast and several new innovations had come in. So Schweber told his teacher, "Sir, that book is slightly dated. I think we should update it." Bethe gladly said, "Please go ahead." And Schweber updated, wrote, rewrote, enlarged, till it became almost a kind of a new book. So he brought it to his teacher, Hans Bethe, who said, "You see, this has become a new book of your own, so leave my name out. You put it in your name, but I shall write an introduction, a foreword." In the foreword, he writes, that is the punchline which I'm trying to present before you. He begins by saying, "It's always a joy to see one's children grow up and to see that they can do things which the parents no longer understand." This book is a good example. So when I see Prasanna Mahatmananda growing in stature and spreading Vedanta, I have the same kind of feeling. It's always a great joy to see one's younger brothers and children grow up. And of course, I understand something of what he is doing. That is the only difference. So we will begin on a serious note. The title today of the talk, as I said, is How Advaita Can Be Made Living and Poetic. So may we begin with the usual Upanishadic chant. This occurs in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad and is traditionally used as a pranama mantra, a mantra for prostrating before the Guru at the time of sannyasa ceremony. Om yo brahmanam vidadhati purvam yo vai vedanscha prahinoti tasmai tam hadevam atma buddhi prakasham mumukshurvai sharanamaham prapadye. As a seeker of liberation, I take refuge in that supreme principle embodied as the Guru, who gave the Vedas at the beginning and empowered the seers to teach these Vedas, and who grants liberation out of his grace. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Peace, Peace, Peace. The title of the talk is taken from a letter from Swami Vivekananda, dated 17th February 1896. It occurs in the 5th volume of Swami Vivekananda's complete works. It's an extraordinary letter which Swami Vivekananda wrote to Alasinga Perumal. As you know, Alasinga Perumal is a very dear disciple of Swami Vivekananda from Madras. Swamiji used to depend upon what he called my Madras boys. They were responsible for collecting the funds and constantly enthusing Swami Vivekananda to go abroad to preach. If it were not for Alasinga and his group of enthusiastic young men, we would not be here discussing Vedanta. Swamiji was hesitant, as you know. He did not know whether to go or not to go. Although he had repeated visions that he should go, although he knew that the Parliament of Religions was being held only for him, he said that also. But once again, the cloud of suspicion and doubt came. That is Avatara Leela, the great sport, divine sport of the incarnation. But it was Alasinga Perumal and his young friends who repeatedly urged Swamiji, you have to go. You are the person who will be able to represent Hinduism in the truest, fullest, and most liberal sense. Ultimately, as we know now, it was Sri Sharada Devi's blessings that made Swamiji go, take the final call. There is the power of Shakti, as you know, and he wrote several letters to Alasinga Perumal, severely scolding him in many of them. Such a severest rebuke, very few people would have borne. And all of you know Swami Vivekananda's language when he gets angry. And he used to say, when roused, I can speak fire. And it is fire indeed, but fire which is very cool and elevating, burning out all that is undesirable. Alasinga bore with all this, faithfully served his guru, and died at a very young age, as most of Swami Vivekananda's disciples did. I always funnily think the difference between the disciples of Sharada Devi, the Holy Mother, and the disciples of Swami Vivekananda lies in the fact Sharada Devi, being the mother, used to bless the disciple, Dirghayuho, live long, live healthy, live happily. And most of them were nonagenarians, as we know, Swami Vireshwarananda, Swami Abhayananda. They crossed 90, most of them, because mother blessed them. And what was the blessing of Swami Vivekananda? I love you ever so much that I'll be most happy to learn that you killed yourself in the service of others. So most of them died young, including Goodwin, who passed away even when Swami Vivekananda was alive. So that apart, Alasinga Perumal got this letter from Swami Vivekananda. You should remember, great prophets like Swamiji do not systematically develop any philosophy. Many scholars have said, oh, Swami Vivekananda cannot be called a philosopher at all. He has not developed a system. The answer to this is, these people don't develop systems. They throw ideas, give inspiration, out of which lesser mortals develop systems. They are like the rishis of the Upanishads. They throw ideas, they throw inspiration. As Swami Vivekananda once said about the rishis, they did not compose, they did not write. Music flowed from their hearts. When music flows, you don't systematize. Systematization through the intellect kills the inspiration. As St. Paul said, which Vivekananda quotes in the Inspired Talks in Thousand Islands, the letter killeth. If you systematize, if you put it in a format, then the whole spirit of the teaching is lost. But it is necessary to put it in a format. So lesser people come later on, they are called acharyas. People like Sri Ramakrishna Swami Vivekananda's avatars who throw ideas, like Sri Krishna, for example. The Bhagavad Gita, there is no systematic development of a particular theme. He talks about bhakti everywhere, jnana everywhere, yoga everywhere. Some people have tried to rearrange the verses in order to bring a system, but kills the spirit of the original book. So Swami Vivekananda, you should carefully pick up certain gems from his writings, and particularly letters. Why letters are important is because in public lectures, he was constrained by the society, the audience, the ambience. And in letters particularly, he poured his heart out, their personal letters. Swami Vivekananda did not mean that they should be published. And they are directly from his pen. The original letters are still preserved in the archives at Belur Mutt in his own writing. The lectures of Swami Vivekananda were taken down by somebody else, Goodwin, for example, and developed and edited. In the letters, Swami Vivekananda poured his heart out and freely, frankly, fearlessly, he wrote certain things which are so valuable to us, and these have to be carefully picked up. One gem of a sentence from this letter, 17th February 1896, to Alasinga Perumal, in which Swami Vivekananda himself describes his life's work. What is the mission for which he came? There's a great lecture by Swami Vivekananda, My Life and My Mission. But this particular sentence in this letter epitomizes, summarizes in a nutshell what exactly he came to preach in the name of Vedanta. This particular sentence, which I have titled my talk, is a part of this sentence. I quote the whole sentence. To put the Hindu ideas into English and to make out of dry philosophy, intricate mythology, queer startling psychology, a religion which shall be simple, easy, popular, and at the same time meet the requirements of the highest minds is a task only they can understand who have attempted it. The dry, abstract Advaita should become living, poetic in everyday life. Out of hopelessly intricate mythology must come concrete moral forms. And out of bewildering yogism must come the most scientific and practical psychology. And all this must be put in a form that even a child may be able to grasp it. And that is my life's work. This is the statement exactly as it occurs in his letter. So I picked up this sentence when Swami Prasannatmananda told me that living Vedanta and living in the spirit is the general theme of this series of lectures. We are now living in the spirit as well as in the pandemic. And the pandemic times arouse within us the inner power by which we will be able to combat it. The power of the Spirit which can overcome all the external obstacles, which are called in Vedanta as dukkhatraya, three kinds of sorrow. Swami Vivekananda said, our ancients were great generalizers and classifiers. There are three fundamental scientific principles based on which Vedanta has grown and been nourished in India over the millennia. They are: one, the classification principle; two, the generalization principle; three, the unification principle. These are common to science, philosophy, all various disciplines of human thought and endeavor, and of course the Vedanta. Suppose I ask you, are you in sorrow? Unless you are a Jivan Mukta, living free and a great saint, you would say, yes, of course, I am in some kind of sorrow. How many kinds of sorrows are there in the world? Oh, innumerable sorrows. I can't name them. Can you classify sorrows? So look at the great genius of our ancient rishis. They classified even sorrow. How many kinds of sorrows can be there and how they can be classified? As most of you must have gone through the elementary physics and chemistry course in schools. We must have read about the periodic table of elements. 92 elements came to be discovered, and the human mind thought that they should be properly classified. So you have the periodic table, the groups and the periods. In exactly the same way, can all the various kinds of sorrows in this world, which humanity has been facing millennia upon millennia since creation, can they be classified? They classified the sorrow into three groups. The commonest sorrow coming from your mind and body, toothache and stomachache and backache. When you keep growing, your knee problem, you can't squat properly, you can't eat well. So the body gives you enough sorrow, and the mind also. Mind is not well, I'm slightly upset. I can't meet my son and daughter living far away. This pandemic has completely taken away all the joys which I had. We can't meet in person, but this technology has helped us to unite. This is called internet. Internet is called the Hiranyagarbha in Vedanta. Hiranyagarbha is the cosmic mind. All the individual minds are parts of the cosmic mind. And every thought that an individual thinks is uploaded in the Hiranyagarbha can be downloaded by anybody, anytime, from anywhere. For which you need two things. One is connectivity, and the other is a password. This connectivity is called yoga, coming from yujudhatu, means to connect. Yukta, satata yukta, 24/7 connectivity. Nitya yukta, constantly being connected. This yoga, and the password is a mantra. Many people ask me, why is the mantra so secretive? You Hindus make everything a secret. There'll be transparency, there'll be openness. I said, yes, of course. Do you have an email address? Of course I do. What's your password? Oh, that I can't tell you. Why? What is so secret about it? There are certain things which are very personal to you. I connect to my God through a mantra, which is my personal space. I operate in that space in which I and my God alone exist. So this is the internet through which we are operating, which is now called Google. And the simplest description of the Hiranyagarbha in the modern language is a conscious Google. If Google had consciousness, that will be the Hiranyagarbha. So you connect. So the body and the mind have their own sorrows. It's called Adi Bhautika, Adhyatmika Dukkha. Then you have sorrow coming from the various beings. The coronavirus is a great example of a sorrow coming from some bhuta, that which exists, beings, living beings, animals and plants and worms and insects and viruses. It's called Adi Bhautika Dukkha. Then the third is the Adi Daivika Dukkha, over which we have little control, a tsunami, a super cyclone, earthquake, forest fire. Sometimes people say many of them also are man-made. We don't know. Extreme environmental activists blame man for everything. So these three kinds of dukkha can be removed only by Atma Jnana. That is the testimony of the Upanishads and Vedanta. Dukkhatraya, threefold sorrow, Adhyatmika, Adibhautika, Adhidaivika, are removable and removable only by self-knowledge. Knowledge of who we are, where we came from, what is our destiny, what is the real nature of our being. An investigation into the real nature of life and existence and beings. This investigative science is called the science of Vedanta. Remember, Vedanta is not a system, it is not a philosophy either, it is not metaphysics, it is not religion, it is not theology, but an investigative science into the inner spirit of man. This is the difference between religions which have a book, swear by the book, and go by certain doctrines and dogmas. In India, in the Hindu religion, we have a book, we have doctrines and dogmas, but these are considered secondary only to the science of investigation into the inner spirit of man, which is an open-ended science. You and I also can contribute now to this science, just like the various discoveries and sciences are not closed. New discoveries are coming up. Just the other day, maybe a week ago, there was an experiment reported in particle physics. Most of you must have seen this. About a muon, a particle, behaving in a very funny way. This has been experimented again and again. And the scientists have confirmed that this behavior of this muon is true. And the theorists are scratching their heads to find out how this can be fitted into what is known the standard model in elementary particle theory, the supersymmetry and so on. And in the world of elementary particle theories, there's a great commotion going on. This is science. You add on new knowledge based on certain new discoveries, and even that doesn't get closed, you move on. Some of the theories which existed, if they are proved wrong by new experiments, discard them fearlessly, and move on. As they say, funnily, the corridor of science is littered with the skeletons of discarded theories. You keep moving. You see a skeleton. What is this skeleton? Oh, it is Newton's theory. Oh, move on. What is this theory? This is Einstein's theory. You move on. So an investigated, open-ended, fearless search into the inner spirit is what is Vedanta. And none of these great masters of Vedanta claims that he or she has discovered anything new. But there's nothing new in this world. All that exists is discovered, as we say, discovery. You cover and uncover, discover. The truth is covered by ignorance, ajnana, and you uncover it and discover it. The truth exists. And newer ways of looking at the truth are discovered. And the human mind gets enriched by looking at truth from innumerable angles of vision. Advaita system existed long before even Shankaracharya came into the picture. It is not that Shankaracharya, the Bhagavan Bhashyakara, the commentator, who was a great protagonist of Advaita Vedanta, discovered it. No, it existed long ago, and he added a new thrust, a new impetus, and made it the living force. Centuries passed, and as time goes on, as we say in physics, the law of entropy, slowly the degree of disorganization grows. There is a decay. Once again, a great Acharya, Avatara, comes up and rediscovers, revivifies, and puts new energy and strength and life into this philosophy. This is exactly what Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda did. Advaita Vedanta was supposed to be for scholars at its worst, and at its best for those tapasvis, renouncers, ascetics, meditating in the caves in the Himalayas and the forests. Swami Vivekananda boldly declared the Vedanta, which was in the caves and the forests, shall now be brought and scattered in the marketplace, in the various malls, supermarkets. Vedanta will be sold. Sold not for money, not as a commercial product, but it shall be available as a sanitizer, as we now know, is freely available everywhere. Sanitize yourself. So it's a supreme soul sanitizer, freely available everywhere, and your daily life can be transformed, metamorphosed, and elevated by a dose of this Advaita Vedanta. So Swami Vivekananda said, the dry, abstract Advaita should become living and poetic in everyday life. Why poetry? Poetry is elevating, not only penetrating, but very soothing and calming your nerves, and gives you great delight. So the Vedanta is a poetry. Vedanta is a music, not only to the ears, but to the soul. And the Advaita Vedanta, Swami Vivekananda believed is the simplest that can be taught. Many of us think that the Advaita is a very complicated system, and we, claiming to be very ordinary, say that we are ordinary mortals caught up in the daily rigmarole of existence, getting up and taking tea and going to the office and coming back day after day, going through the same kind of rigmarole. We can't grasp the high principles of Advaita Vedanta. Swami Vivekananda said, I can teach Advaita Vedanta even to a child. It is the simplest because it is concerning ourselves. Upanishads asked a very simple question, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. What is the most favorite, most beloved subject in the world for you? What is it that you like the most? What is dearest to your heart? I'll pose it slightly differently. Suppose you say, I am going for a trip in the Himalayas, for a trekking expedition. I am going for an outing. Are you going alone? No, I am taking my companion and taking my wife and children. I am taking my friends. Suppose you say, I am going alone. And somebody asks you, you are going alone? Are you taking yourself? Are you mad? How can I go without taking myself? The fortunate or the unfortunate thing in life is wherever you go, you have to be there with you. I can't go alone anywhere without taking me. My body, my mind, my intellect, all the various predilections and prejudices and concepts which I have formed since childhood, all of them have to go with me wherever I go. And that is the good and bad thing. I go alone somewhere and then keep meditating. Hundreds of thousands of negative thoughts come and impinge upon my mind and disturb me. Or when I'm alone, I feel great peace and elevation. Which means that I have to be with me all the time. And that entity called the I, which has to be with me all the time, which is inseparable from my existence, that should be the most beloved because it's with me all the time. That is the most interesting subject, most important subject, and the most beloved subject, and the dearest subject. Unfortunately, Vedanta says, we do not feel like finding out more about that subject. Give a very worldly example. When people are in love, they try to know about what the other man or woman is thinking. What is she eating? What is he dressing about? What is he talking? What is he like? Constantly they are concerned and worried about what the other man or woman is about thinking, dressing. So your whole mind is given to that person who you love. If the I is the most beloved, would you not spend all your time thinking about what is it about? What is the nature of this I? How does it emerge? Where does it come from? Where does it ultimately go? What is the real nature of this I? You should be deeply absorbed in it, provided you felt that it is your most beloved. Vedanta tells you, just turn your eyes within, called Avritta Chakshu in the Kathopanishad. All the senses which are outgoing, not by our fault, the Creator God, whoever He is, turned all the senses outward and killed us. and therefore they're running outside. A man of discernment, a man of spiritual wisdom, turns all the senses inward in order to achieve immortality. Turn it inward and ask a fundamental question about who this I is. This is Advaita Vedanta. And it is not that we do not know what is the I. We know. Long ago, I heard that the American Psychological Association made a survey. You know, these associations in America keep making surveys. Something they have to do. They made a survey, and what is the most commonly used and oft used word in the English language? Of course, you can guess the result. I. Every moment of your day, every day, you use this word so many times. And oftentimes you do not even announce yourself by your name. Suppose you call somebody who you know, "Hi, this is me." You don't say your name. Suppose the other man can't place you. Who is that? Can't you remember me? I am so and so. Your name comes later. The I comes first. The Upanishads have discovered this and said the I is the name of Atman. What we call the Atman is not a mystical entity somewhere. It is the I, which is the Atman. See, remember, Upanishads and Vedanta are not philosophies and systems which were codified and discovered based on certain facts. These are profound answers to certain simple, naive questions of daily experience. Every day you experience certain things. You ask certain fundamental questions about that experience. This is what is called science. What does science do? Science asks simple questions about your daily experience. When the apple fell, Newton said, "Why does this apple fall?" It's an experience which he saw, and he asks a simple question. Why is it that ice is cold, fire is hot? Why do various objects behave the way they do? And science grows. So science is based upon daily experience. Exactly the same way, Vedanta is a documented evidence of the profound answers that the sages and the rishis found for certain simple, naive, apparently commonplace questions of daily life. I'll give a simple example. Kena Upanishad is a very famous Upanishad. It begins by asking a question. When I open my eyes, how is it that I see? Is it a question to be asked? Our children ask us questions. And we, the elders, snub the children. Hey, don't ask silly questions. The answers to these silly questions is a great discovery. Albert Einstein was asked once, how did he come up on this great theory of relativity? He smiled and said, you see, when we are children, we ask very inconvenient, uncomfortable questions of our parents. And it looks so funny to them. And when we grow up, the so-called education takes away all these fundamental investigative questions. That is the wonderful gift that education gives us. You educate yourself into going into a shell by which all the questions are completely silenced. And another very interesting ruse that our teachers used to play, ask, you will come to know about it when you go to higher class. Wait for some time. When they go to the higher class, you must have studied all this in the lower classes. So education kills the inquiry which a naive, innocent child has when he looks at the world with new eyes. Einstein said, we used to ask such questions, but when we grow up, we silence them through our pedantry and education. But in my case, I did not forget those questions, kept asking them, and the answer is the theory of relativity. So Kena Upanishad asks, when you open the eyes, how do you see? How do you hear? Of course, the ears don't close, unfortunately for us. If God had made the ears also close, it would be a great blessing. You don't want to hear certain things, but the ears don't close. The eyes can close. How do you hear? How does the mind think? How does the tongue taste? Kene shudam padati preshudam manah kena prana prathama praiti yuktaha kene shidam vachamimam vadanti chakshusrotram kaudevo yunakti. Kena Upanishad, the beginning. Kena, by whom? By whose power? Is it the eyes that see or something behind the eye which sees? If it's the eyes which see, then with the eyes open also people don't see. Some people sleep with open eyes. Some people with defect in the eyes are open but they don't see. So the eyes alone are not responsible for your seeing or vision. There's something behind the eye which is responsible. What is that? So look at the question. Then they discovered behind the eye, behind the ear, behind the mind, there is some power which is called the power of Brahman, power of God, whatever name you call it. And they did not want to describe it in any definitive fashion because it's indescribable. And they describe it so beautifully. It is the eye of the eye, ear of the ear, mind of the mind, the prana of the prana. Shrotrasya shrotram manaso manoyad vachoha vacham savu pranasya pranaha chakshushas chakshurati muchyadhiras pretyasman lokad amrita bhavanti. Such a poetic. Swamiji was very fond of this Upanishad. Look at the poetry. I'm giving a sample of how the Upanishadic investigation began. So the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad asks, the most beloved is your own self, the I, and all that you call priyatva, dearness, belovedness in the world, therefore springs from your deep attachment to your own self as the priya. Priya is a word in Sanskrit, means the dear, beloved. The priyatva, the dearness which you feel to your husband, your wife, your children, to your car, to your bank balance, to your credit card, to your mobile phone, all this priyatva that you feel, it I'm so dear, that arises from your fundamental dearness of your own self. Look at the discovery. I'm just giving a glimpse of how it can be made living and practical in daily life. Because in daily life, you have to be with you all the time. I always used to finally think, I can't go away from myself wherever I am. So since I have to live with myself, fortunately or unfortunately, why not I try to love myself? What is myself? Is it the body? Is it the mind? Is it the intellect? If it were, then the body decays, body gives me troubles. It can't be. That which decays and dies can't be the ultimate spirit, because that which is ephemeral, changing, cannot be the source of any joy in me. If I am dear to myself, it can't be this body. Some people are very fond of their teeth. I have very strong teeth, see, when they smile. But the poor teeth also fall off. You see them at the age of 97. What has happened to your teeth? Oh, teeth have fallen. You are so fond of your teeth, the teeth went away. You're fond of your teeth, you're fond of your body, you're fond of the glow of your skin. All of them leave you after some time. So they can't be you. What about your mind? I remember everything. I have very good memory. And a time comes you can't remember anything. You suffered with dementia, you forget everything. What about your intellect? I wrote a book. Now it's very easy these days to write books thanks to Google. You have to intelligently copy paste. But you have to do it intelligently. You'll be caught with plagiarism. I write a book and I'm very fond of that book. I'm extremely delighted I wrote this book. And I give it to everybody. After some time, that book is challenged by somebody and somebody writes a better book. Your books do not any longer sell. That makes you sad. So my intellect can't be me. My body can't be me. The mind can't be me. The intellect can't be me. So which is the me? See how a very simple investigative process into your sense of belovedness, which is a very common feeling with every one of us has. The feeling of love, feeling of affection, the feeling of belovedness, the feeling of being dear. This is the most common feeling in animals, in insects, in human beings, everywhere. The power of love. Now, what is the source of this love? See how these rishis were investigating into simple emotions. What is the source of it? They found that the source consists in me loving myself. It is not selfish love. It is not self-centered. It is self with capital S rather than small s. This is the difficulty in English. In English, when you say self-centered, that means you're extremely fond of your own self, your body, my wife, my children, my family, my this. Here, Vedanta says, replace this small s by a capital S. What is the small and capital? There is a higher self in you, of which the small self is only a pale shadow. There is a self in you with a capital S, which is called the Atman, which is beyond the mind and the body and the intellect. How do you know? Once again, a question. So remember, at every point you ask questions. Investigate. Throw away all that doesn't stand to reason. How do you know there's a higher self? Once again, they investigate in daily experience. How Vedanta comes living in everyday life. When I am talking to you, you are listening from far away. 11.5 hours we are distant, and 15,000 kilometers distant perhaps. But we are able to connect now. What is now? Is a big question in science. Einstein completely demolished the idea of simultaneity and nowness. We are able to do that. Now I ask a question. When I'm doing this and talking to you, all of you are awake, and one of the most prime concerns of a speaker is to keep the audience awake. You are alert, you are awake, you are listening, you're absorbing, you're smiling, and you're happy. Now, when I'm tired at the end of the day and go to sleep, which all of us do, you conjure up so many things in dreams. The same scene perhaps comes to you, you listen to me talking, and you interact with so many people. There are cars and there are so many people moving around in dream. Who creates these? Don't wish this question away. See, Vedanta says you can't wish any question away by talking about the conscious and unconscious and super, nothing. Just ask a simple question. I don't want theories. I want answers to simple questions. Who creates all this in dreams? It's me, because nobody else except me. It's my mind, my samskaras. But they are real objects at that time. Don't say they're unreal, because you didn't know that they were unreal when you were dreaming. You come back and say, oh, it was a dream, it is unreal. No. When you are in dream, you know that they are real. You fall down and break your leg. There's a real leg which you broke in dream. But when you wake up, your waking leg is perfectly all right. There is one boy who was very fond of ice cream. So in dream, he went on eating ice creams. So many different kinds of ice creams. He was offered one more chocolate ice cream. He was grasping it and dream broke. The boy cried and cried. Why do you cry? I could have finished eating the ice cream and then woken up. So this dream experience is real to you when you are dreaming. You can't wish it away. And you have created all the objects from out of your own mind. Remember, you become a creator at that time. This is Vedanta. Vedanta says the consciousness has the capacity to divide itself between us as a subject and an object. I have not created all of you. God has created you. But here I play God. I become a creator. I create objects, men, women, from out of my own consciousness, which proves by experience that consciousness has the capacity to divide itself into a subject and object and create. I become terribly fatigued and go to deep sleep, dreamless sleep. When you go to dreamless sleep, there is nothing, no experience, no I, no me, no objects. I come back and say, oh, I slept so well. I was so happily sleeping. I did not know anything. That means you have two experiences in sleep. See how the ancient Vedantic masters are investigating. You had two experiences in sleep. One, I slept happily. Two, I did not know anything. Sukham asvapsam nakinchit avedisham. This is a Sanskrit equivalent. So who is experiencing these two? Who is experiencing the happiness that you feel in sleep? Who is experiencing the non-experience that you had in sleep? I did not have any experience. I didn't know anything. But who says I did not know anything? Who is the I? Don't wish this question away and saying, I'm not interested in sleep and all that. I'm interested only in this state of waking. If you are, then you are not a scientist. A scientist is a person who will take the totality of experience. A waking state experience, dream state experience, and the sleep experience are the three states of experience through which I pass every day. And I have to find out Who is the I? One tentative answer they came to, just like scientists. In science, what we do is come out with a particular theory and see how it goes. Yeah, I propose a theory. There is an I in the waking state. There's another I in the dream state. There is a third I in the deep sleep state. Why do I say that? Because the experience of the waking state is contradicted by the experience of the dream I. I'm a footballer and I kicked the football so powerfully and it went into the goal. I was a race celebrity and I had a crack in my ankle. I broke my leg and I am lying in the hospital with a sling and I'm dreaming again that I scored a goal. Which is the I which is real? The waking I is lying down in the hospital with a sling, and the dream I is scoring a goal, and the deep sleep I doesn't know anything. So are there three I's? They investigated still further and said, no, there can't be three I's. You can say there is one supreme I, of which these three I's are but modes of expression. Mark this word mode, just like in science. This I expressed in three modes. In the mode of waking state, it has an experience. In the mode as a dream, it has another experience. In this mode of the deep sleep, it has an entirely different kind of experience. So what is that I of which these three are modes? They went farther and discovered that supreme transcendental I, which is manifesting and playing as the three modes, that I, indestructible, undecaying, supreme, is called the fourth I, if you want to call it fourth. Turiya is called the Chaitanya, called the Atma Chaitanya. Why I am mentioning all this is to impress upon all of us that by investigating daily experience, we can experience the Atman. Advaita Vedanta says the Atman is experienced here. Just like the belovedness which you feel for your wife and children and husband and your things which you possess, that belovedness arises from the Atman, and the awareness that you feel in the waking state being contradicted experientially in the dream state, and both of them contradicted experientially in the deep sleep state. There is a supreme awareness which places 1, 2, 3, just like in the car, you put first gear, second gear, and third gear. You play among these three, but you are the supreme, undecaying, unchanging I. This can be brought to bear upon your daily experience. What is the usefulness? Even when you are moving around in the waking state, remember there's an I which is watching. It's called a Sakshi Chaitanya, a witness awareness, which is allowing the I to play in three modes. So keep the Sakshi Chaitanya awake and alert, and always identify yourself with the supreme consciousness called the Atman. You can do it. It is a practice which is doable, which is easy, and which is so easy that you don't require any extra time and energy. Whatever you do, you're driving a car, you are operating the computer, and you are talking to your neighbor, whatever you do, remember that there is an I which is watching all this, which doesn't participate in all the activities, but allows all the activities to go on. Just like the screen, the white screen on which the film is being projected, the screen allows all the activities to go on, himself not participating. There's a non-participating, undecaying, supreme awareness, the I, which is the back of everything, which is the Atman. Swami Vivekananda emphasized this aspect of Advaita Vedanta repeatedly. He said, even a child can be taught Advaita Vedanta. And he said, teach this Advaita to everybody. If a fisherman thinks he is the Atman, he'll be a better fisherman. If a lawyer thinks he is the Atman, he'll be a better lawyer. If a student thinks he is Atman, he is a better student, and so on. What does it mean? That means that you always bring this awareness of the Atman consciousness to bear upon all your activity in the waking, dream, and deep sleep state, and stay put with that Atman which nobody can shake. In these times of pandemic, the whole world is panicking with the tiniest of the tiny Corona COVID-19, which has completely shaken and pulverized the pride of man. How do you remain calm? How do you stay put? You are the undecaying Atman. Tell yourself, repeatedly remember this. At the moment, it may appear theoretical, it may be intellectual, but anything which is truth, constantly meditated upon, will become real tomorrow. That's why the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, Atma vareva are drashtavyaha. This Atman has to be realized. How? Shrotavyo mantavyo nididhyasitavyaha. It should be heard about. It should be reflected upon seriously. And one should get absorbed in this thought. Shravana, manana, nididhyasana. Hearing about it from the scriptures, from the acharyas, because that is the truth, from those who have realized it, reflecting upon it repeatedly, and ultimately getting deeply absorbed so that you can't be shaken by the worst sorrow. Yasmin sthito na dukkhena guruna vichalyate, the Bhagavad Gita says, established in which the state of supreme consciousness, the Atman, you can't be shaken and agitated by even the worst of miseries. Yasman no dvijate loko, lokan no dvijate chaya, harsha marsha bhayodveger mukto yas sachame priya. 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. You are not agitated by the world, and you do not agitate the world. Because you are the infinite spirit, ajo nitya shashvato yam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire, the Bhagavad Gita. You are unborn, undecaying. God is dead. That's what Nietzsche said. The answer to this, when was he ever born? You are unborn, undecaying, undying. It is the body and the mind which are affected, and detach yourself from the body and the mind and remain as a spirit. This is the practical Vedanta which Swami Vivekananda taught. Detach yourself as much as possible from the body and the mind. Things come and go. Things change. Everything is constantly changing. There is a changeless, eternal, undecaying, infinite entity which is you, which is the I, which is your real nature. Identify yourself. Think of this. Dream about it. And you feel great peace. Try this. These are not theories. They have been tried, attempted, and practiced millennia upon millennia by hundreds of thousands of people in India, till it has become a habit with people. The resilience we talk about in the times of pandemic. What is the resilience which is required? The resilience, not the mind and the body, the resilience that you are the spirit. I will end with a story by Swami Vivekananda in the life of Alexander the Great. Alexander came to India in his mission of completely conquering the whole world. And he saw one holy man, a rishi, sitting quietly in the bank of a river and meditating. By seeing his face, Alexander was so deeply impressed. The calmness, the tranquility, the joy. Then went to him, said, "You are so peaceful and calm. I have need of you. I will take you to my country." Then the saint opened his eyes and said, "Please don't disturb me, sir. I'm quietly sitting here enjoying the sun." You get lost from here. Alexander got so furious. You know who I am? He said, I do not know, nor do I care to know, but please don't disturb me now. Then he took out his sword and said, this moment I can chop off your head and kill you. Then he laughed and laughed. Why are you laughing? This is the greatest lie that you could ever utter. Can you kill me? This body may be killed by you and you think it's killing. I am that infinite spirit whom nobody can kill. Nayanam chindanti shastrani nayanam dahati pavakaha nachayanam kledayantyapo na shoshayati marutaha. The Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter. This Atman can't be killed by a weapon. Atman cannot be dried by air. Atman can't be wetted by water. Atman can't be burnt by fire. That is the Supreme Spirit. And who can kill whom? I am that infinite spirit. And Swami Vivekananda is fond of telling a story. A mosquito was sitting in the horn of a bull and constantly biting it. After a long time, the mosquito felt bad, said, Mr. Bull, I will go away. I've been troubling you. The bull said, oh, you are here. I never noticed you. Come and settle down on my horn with all your family and keep biting all your life. What can you do to me? So we are the Supreme Spirit. Emma Calvé was a great celebrity in Paris in those days. As most celebrities are, she was depressed, she was frustrated, almost contemplating ending her life. Somebody told her, go and meet a great yogi from India, Swami Vivekananda. She came and meet Swami Vivekananda. The moment she entered the room, Swamiji said, oh, my child, what a terrible atmosphere you brought with you. Calm down, as if a storm is raging in your heart. She sat down. Swamiji straight looked into her eyes and started talking about certain things which she had not shared with anybody. She became frightened, flabbergasted, started crying. Swami, how did you know all this? Did anybody speak to you about me? Swami Vivekananda smiled and said, is it necessary? I can see you like an open book. Then he gave her a powerful Vedantic impulse. Don't brood your secret sorrows. You are that infinite self. You are Nitya Shuddha Mukta Swabhava, ever free, ever awakened, ever pure, and assert your real nature. That impulse, Advaitic impulse given by this great man, went straight into her heart. She was almost losing consciousness in Samadhi. She became frightened and cried, what are you doing to me? I'm losing myself. Then Swamiji told a story, which will be a fitting finale for this talk. The story is, a water drop was falling into the ocean. And the drop was crying bitterly. The ocean said, why are you crying, my child? Oh, I'm going to lose my individuality as the drop. The ocean smiled and said, my child, you are not losing your individuality as the drop. You are going to regain your individuality as the ocean. You were the ocean. You went far away, taken by the rays of the sun, and you are coming back to the ocean, to my bosom, to join the trillions and billions of water drops, brothers and sisters like you. Come back and realize your individuality as the ocean. That is a great message of Advaita Vedanta which Swami Vivekananda gave to us. And we are that infinite spirit, and we should go back to the realization that we are infinite. Nothing to be newly attained. You have to realize that which you have forgotten. Ignorance gone through Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, hearing, reflection, and deep meditation and absorption, and we will be new men and women. Purana is the word which is used for the Atman. Pura means old, Nava means new. That which is ever old, antique, and ever new. Pura api nava is the commentary of Shankaracharya. So we will ever be fresh and new. At the same time, we will know that you are the ancient being. We existed millions of years ago when the sun and the moon were not there, because I am that infinite ocean of consciousness. Mayyanantamaham bodho aschariyam jiva vichayah udyanti ghranti khelanti pravishanti swabhavataha. Ashtavakra Samhita says, I am that infinite ocean of existence and knowledge and bliss, on which various waves of worlds and beings come and play. I am that infinite ocean. Swami Vivekananda wrote in a letter, clouds of happiness and misery come over me. I am that infinite blue sky. Let us remain as that blue sky and enjoy the great bliss of absorption in our own real nature, which is our birthright. It doesn't come from outside. May Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother Sharada, and all the great saints and seers of the past and present, and all the religions of the world help us to attain this state of higher awareness. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. May the whole exercise be a humble offering unto Sri Ramakrishna. Thank you so much for your patience.